So, fair warning before I begin here. I just want to mention that when it comes to a game like Callisto Protocol, a game that was very excited for because I was looking forward to it, considering how it was created by the creator of Dead Space. I am going to be probably a little bit more critical towards this game than I normally would be, and I don't apologize for that. I don't. Because this is a game again that I was looking forward to, and unfortunately, it has the I want to say the unfortunateness of having to follow in Dead Space's footsteps. But at that same time, this is not Dead Space, so we are going to look at this game in two different lights. We're going to look at it first in a rating it, or not rating it, but reviewing it in its own way as its own game, and then we're going to take a look at it compared to Dead Space, and that's where things are going to get a little bit more critical when discussing this game. And again, I do not apologize for that. I at all. This is something that it needs to be done. So with that being said, let's just say right out the gate, Dead Space is Dead Space. See, I'm already doing it. Callisto Protocol is actually a really good game. It has flaws, but it is a good game. All right, so there I said it. Review's over. Wrong. We need to actually talk about the game. So, first things first, the whole premise of the game is pretty interesting. And my biggest thing when it comes to a game like this is how are they going to have you progress through the game? Is it going to be in a Resident Evil format or like old school survival horror where you get to fully explore the area? Or is it going to be like Dead Space or newer Resident Evil games where it's more of, and I say newer Resident Evil games because Resident Evil started going back to the old formula, but let's say Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 and Revelations 1 and 2, or Dead Space 1, 2, and 3, where it's more of a linear format. And this game is more of a linear format, following through from segment to segment. Callisto Protocol is done in the latter. So similar to Dead Space, it goes in a linear format, section by section. Now, it doesn't have as many sections as Dead Space does, which is both a good and bad thing at the same time. The reason why it's a good thing is because Dead Space segments itself into, I think it was like 12 different chapters. And some chapters are short, some chapters are longer. But the reason why that's a good thing is because it doesn't break up the flow of gameplay. Now, the bad part of this is that there aren't as many sections where there's actual breaks. So you will go on for a couple hours without having an actual stopping point per se, outside of the little areas where you can go ahead and buy your items. Now, I don't like that kind of format just because, again, it gives you a long sitting point, and if you're at a segment in the game where there's not a lot of things going on, there's not a lot of action because the enemies, it's a finite amount of enemies in each area, you might find yourselves kind of just being a little bit bored at times because there's no reprieve or no breaks between each segment. So again, take that how you will for that one. That's both kind of a good and bad thing. But let's go into combat with this game, because combat with this game is weird. I'm just going to be 100% with you on this. Is combat in this game, it's a mixed bag for me. And the reason why it's a mixed bag is because it relies heavily on melee as opposed to Dead Space, which relies heavily on using your arsenal to be able to defend yourself. This game does provide guns and stuff, but it's done in a way that is kind of a downgrade from Dead Space. The way that you switch your guns, it's not efficient at all, and it leaves you open to attack a lot of times, and especially on bosses where most of the time you can't attack the bosses with physical attacks or you will get one-shotted. There's just no way to properly switch your weapons without having like a breather kind of moment, because it takes a little bit of time for your character to swap his guns out. And the whole reason why this is because you have two main guns. You have a shotgun, which is the riot gun, and then you have your hand cannon. Now, the hand cannon changes into different types of guns, but in order to do that, you have to basically click onto the hand cannon and then swap it to the different guns, and then he will do the motions of removing the top part of the gun to swap it to a different gun. This is why I'm saying that it takes a little bit of time for him to swap his guns out. Or as opposed to Dead Space, where you can go ahead and map your weapons onto your D-pad, and that's it. You just swap between your weapons. Pretty much like every other shooter. You know, it's a downgrade from what Dead Space 1 was back in 2009. So, I really don't like the way that combat is handled in this game. There are things that are really cool about the combat, though. So, for example, when you're doing melee attacks, you will, I think usually after 1 or 2 hits, you'll be able to target a vulnerable spot on the enemy. So you'll get like a targeting on them. And at that point, you can whip out your gun for a quick shot that does extra damage. And finding a flow between all of that is key to making your way through this game. So basically, when you shoot the enemy, you'll be able to stun them for a second. You can rush at them and use your melee weapons again and continue that combat. So it's a very good pacing combat once you get used to it. But the fact of the matter is, if you try to rely too much on one thing or the other, meaning if you try to rely too much on the guns or too much on your physical or melee combat, you're going to be disadvantaged, because the melee combat falls flat on its face if there are more than 2 enemies on screen. And speaking of the enemies on screen, these are some of the most polite enemies I've ever seen. And the reason why I say that is because they will legitimately wait for you to stop wailing on their teammate or on their other AI. And I'm talking, this is on the hardest difficulty currently available. They will wait for you to finish wailing on their friend for them to then jump in and start attacking you. These are the most polite enemies ever, because any other enemy in any other game, Dead Space included, will go and just continue to wail on you until you are dead. So this is a weird kind of thing. I don't know why they did this, and I hope that in the upcoming patches, because they are going to update the game with a harder difficulty and permadeath mode. So I hope in these modes and the harder difficulties they fix that, so all the enemies have a smarter AI and they continue attacking you and pressuring you. Because that kind of it's weird. It's weird. You know, you're there fighting an enemy and the other one's just kind of chilling, just watching. Like, oh, cool. It's kind of like watching DBZ, right? Like, you know how like there's the whole Z squad, right? And they only go one at a time. Like, why? It's like 5-on-2 or 5-on-1. Just everybody wail on them. You know, like it's a weird thing that they implemented into this game, and I don't see why they did that. But anyways, with that aside, though, as I mentioned, the way that the melee goes with implementing both physical and using your guns at the same time, it creates a different kind of loop that is very similar but dissimilar to Resident Evil 4. And the reason why I say that is because in Resident Evil 4, you can shoot the enemy's legs, they'll fall to their knees, and then you melee. Either, you know, suplexing them or kicking them and then running up to them and slicing them with your knife. This one, on the other hand, you melee them, shoot them, run up to them, melee them again, shoot them until they're dead. You just keep on doing that. But that only works on regular enemies, doesn't work on bosses. As I mentioned before, bosses, if you try to melee them, you will die. It's a one-hit kill. So, with the combat, there is a dodging mechanic that they added into this game, which at first, on launch, did not work right at all. You would dodge, and the enemies would still hit you, and it would interrupt your dodge. Like the dodge itself is supposed to give you kind of like a invincibility frame where you'll dodge the enemy. But what was happening on during the game on launch was you would dodge, and the enemy would still hit you mid dodge, which basically neglected the the whole dodging mechanic. But this has been patched, so currently when you're playing the game, you don't have this issue. It's actually a lot smoother, and the dodging actually works. Um, the biggest downside to the dodging though is in close quarters when you're fighting certain bosses, the dodging mechanic is still wonky. So because there's a wall next to you, if you go to try to dodge, your character I guess gets blocked by the wall and the boss kills you. So on normal enemies, the dodging mechanic works great. Everywhere else, not so much still. So hopefully, again, they do another patch to be able to fix that. I don't know what else they could do besides just patching that out. Um, it's a weird kind of wonky situation system that they have, and yeah, it's when it works, it's great. When it doesn't, it's frustrating to say the least. Um, with all of that, though, it is a pretty decently polished system with the combat. Um, the the combat is very different than any other game, whether it be Resident Evil or Dead Space or Fatal Frame or anything like that. It stands alone by itself, and it kind of reminds me, honestly, a little bit of like Last of Us, the original Last of Us, not Last of Us Part Two, because Last of Us Part Two combat was so much better. Um, but yeah, it reminds me uh, quite a bit of Last of Us, the way that the melee combat worked, where you could go ahead and punch the enemies, but don't rely on the physical combat. So it's a nice system that they put in there. I appreciate it, especially again as a way to kind of stand out and be different from everybody else. The When it comes to the other mechanics in the game, though, like specifically tutorials, these are some of the most invasive tutorials that I've seen, and I don't like it. I don't like it because it repeats itself. The tutorials will show up, and they'll show up in a way that allows you to do whatever it is that it's teaching you. It'll do it so it's in practice, meaning so you actually perform the tutorial. And then, right after showing you the tutorial, it will interrupt your screen, and there'll be a pop up, like an annoying pop up. You know, like you get like you're on a website, you're having a little fun. Um, let's not go there. But you're on a website and you get an annoying pop up, and then you got to click the pop up to close it. That's what happens in this game, and it's very immersion breaking. I don't like that. Dead Space did the tutorials in a way that it was immersive within the game. Yes, it repeated things a few times. Like the shoot the tentacles. It told you probably 3 times to shoot the tentacles, but it did it in a way that it didn't interrupt the flow of gameplay. Unlike this game, where it interrupts the flow of gameplay, and that is a big deal to me. I really don't like that, and I wish there was a way to turn it off. There's not even a way to turn off tutorials in this game. That's the other thing. At least in Dead Space, you can turn off tutorials. This one, you cannot turn off tutorials. So, again, a downgrade from Dead Space. And these downgrades, they're pretty significant, all things considered. Because even going to the audio design for this game, and I guess now we're pivoting to audio design. Going to the audio design for this game, it is nowhere near the quality of what Dead Space is. Dead Space's audio design was phenomenal. I still hold it as like a standard of what horror games should be when it comes to audio. Like this game, or Dead Space, it was groundbreaking with their audio design. This game, on the other hand, not so much. And it's weird in a sense because I don't know if this was supposed to be a scary game. It doesn't, like, there was never a point when I played this game where I felt scared. Where in Dead Space, I felt terrified in Dead Space. Even to this day, Dead Space still finds ways of making me jump. This game, though, had nothing when it came to jump scares. And it was weird because you could tell they were trying to play on things like Dead Space, but just didn't do it. So I guess we're going to move on and segue to that part, which is going to be talking about the story for this game. The story for this game, and spoilers, I'm not going to get too deep into the story, mainly because I don't fully understand this story. It's not like Dead Space, where Dead Space, you understand everything that was going on. The marker was driving people crazy, and it was transforming them into necromorphs. This game makes you feel like something's going on like that, but then the way that it unfolds, the creatures were created by people as like experimentations, but at the same time, it doesn't really do a good job of explaining all of this. And that's where, to me, it's weird. It falls kind of flat with the story. It's an interesting premise, but it makes little to no sense. Where in Dead Space and Dead Space 2, they kind of retcon things a little bit with the way that the marker worked. Excuse me. With the way that the marker worked, and Isaac having built the second marker that's in Dead Space 2. So they kind of play on this in Callisto Protocol by having the main character be involved in spreading this virus or whatever that is basically transforming all these people. So on top of them doing that, they also play it in a way that it's, how can I put this? They played in a way that I can't tell if it's an Easter egg or if they were trying to do something but then changed their minds. Because throughout this game, your character, it seems like he's going crazy, right? He starts to, how can I put this? He starts to hallucinate things. He starts to hear things, calling his name, which is very similar to Dead Space. But they never pay it off. Instead, they pay off the hallucination in a way that it has to do with the thing that's on the back of his neck, which is what also is your health meter. But apparently that neural implant is affecting the way that he sees everything and is making him hallucinate. But at that same time, they don't really play that off so much, because then it almost seems like to the point where he either blocked out his own memories or somebody blocking it or something. It's weird. It's weird. Play through the game and you'll see what I'm talking about. But I just couldn't really fully get into this story. I had fun playing the game, but the story was just, I don't know, it was kind of weak. Especially compared to Dead Space. Dead Space story was engaging, it was enticing, it was intriguing. It had all of the above. Like it marked off everything. Where this game was, it was just okay. The story was decent enough for me to keep going through it, but not good enough for me to actually care. If that makes sense. And again, I said at the beginning of this video that Callisto Protocol is a very good game. It's just not Dead Space good. And that story alone just, I don't know what they're going to do with this. There's planned DLC for this, which, don't get me started on DLC, but there's planned DLC for this game, which just makes me believe that, like, oh, you know, they didn't finish the game. They didn't finish the story purposefully. Again, I'll go on a rant on DLC, I swear to God. But this game just, it lacks a lot when it comes to story. Music wise goes into the audio design. Again, it's not Dead Space audio design where you hear the necromorphs crawling all over the place. This game felt more, dare I say, Resident Evil-ish than Dead Space when it comes to the enemies. Hell, even when it comes to the inventory itself, because the inventory is very limited in the beginning of this game, and it's still, even more so limited, or not more so limited, but it's still limited when you get to the second half of the game and you're able to expand your inventory. So definitely not like Dead Space, where Dead Space gives you a lot more inventory to play with, where this game doesn't. But let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is how I rate these games heavily. Replayability. Does this game make me want to come back and play it? And I'm going to be honest with you. No, it doesn't. I have gone back and replayed it. I played it on the normal difficulty on live stream, and then off stream I played it on the hardest difficulty to see if it played any differently, and it does not. And again, I am still going to keep saying it. This game is a very good game, but the replayability is just not there. First off, there's no New Game Plus. Now they're going to do an update and give New Game Plus, but why are games these days not coming out with New Game Plus? I don't understand this. Why is this a thing? Every game should have some sort of New Game Plus mode to it. When did we stop doing this? Like Horizon Forbidden West, for example, didn't have New Game Plus. That was a patch that was added in. This game, same thing, is going to be a patch that's added in for New Game Plus. Cyberpunk 2077, no New Game Plus when it released. What is going on with these games not doing New Game Pluses? The whole purpose of New Game Plus is for us to go and basically superpower our way through the game because we already beat it and we want to have extra fun in this. Dead Space did it in a way that worked really well. The game had New Game Plus, but if you wanted to play a harder difficulty, you're starting fresh. So I really like that concept in Dead Space. Again, it's a step down going into Callisto Protocol. I don't understand why you have such good ideas and just good things in general in one game that you created, but then you come to this game and you don't implement those ideas into this. I don't understand this. So, as I mentioned, I really do like this game. I think it's a really good game. There are things about it that need to be fixed. And I'm sorry if this review came off more of like a harsh rant, because that's not what this is. Should you play this game? Yes. Should you play it at $60, $70? No. And I say that because it's a short game with no replayability. It's a 9-hour game, no replayability. There's no reason to replay this game. There's not any story that gets unlocked. There's not any extra weapons. There is nothing. As of this video, as of recording this video, there is nothing. No reason to revisit Callisto Protocol. Unlike Dead Space, unlike Resident Evil, unlike Fatal Frame. I could go on and on about all these other games that fit into the same genre of survival horror. And that's even debatable to call this survival horror, because I don't think it's survival horror. I think it's more action horror. But regardless, there are other games that offer more replayability, more reasons to revisit those games. Callisto Protocol is not one of those games that gives you a reason to revisit it. Now, when the update happens, will I change my mind? I don't know. We're going to have to see what happens with that New Game Plus. Are there unlocks that happen? Are there any differences? Hell, even, let's just put it this way. Tormented Souls, which is an indie game that I really love, and I'm not saying that just because I've gotten to know the developers. I've gotten to know the developers because I got to play the game before meeting the developers. I got to play the game before release, and I love that game. And I still do. Tormented Souls is a beautifully made game. And it has multiple endings, different reasons to replay that game. Callisto Protocol does not. And this is a game that has a much higher budget, has a much bigger team. Why is it that they can't deliver a game that meets the standards of what Dead Space was? But again, it's a very good game. So you see why I'm a little torn here when I talk about this review. Should you play it? Yes. Should you play it at $60, $70? No. What's the price point you should probably play this game? $30 or $40. Only because there's no replayability. If there was replayability in this game, it would easily be a $60, $70 game. But because there is no replayability, no reasons to revisit this game, it is not a $60, $70 game. So thank you for watching this weird ass review, because it is weird. I'm all over the place on this because that's how my thought process is for this game. It's all over the place. And leave a comment down below. I'll see you guys in the next one. Everybody, happy gaming.